Hello and welcome to Vishnu IAS Academy. It is one of the premier and the best institute for UPSC civil service examination preparation in Hyderabad. I am Basavaraj, having 12 plus years of experience in teaching geography. So here in this session, I'll be discussing in brief about the strategy which has to be taken for prelims UPSC examination with reference to geography, right? A small strategy. Now, the moment when you talk about the geography and its relevance in the prelims, there is always questions which are there from geography. And moreover, you should remember that geography is a multidisciplinary subject. It means that if you are good enough in geography, it will help you in writing ecology and environment as well, plus disaster management. Now, if you see the trend of questions which are asked in geography, so in the year 2013, 18 questions were there. 18 questions were there. 2015, 16 questions were there. And a drop in 2017. Then again, 2021, it started to increase. Then again, when you see the data compared to 14, 16, 18, we find that again there is a tendency of increasing of the questions in geography. If you see the last year, 2024, 18 questions were there from geography. And even in 2023, 16 questions were there. It means that a good weightage is being there. And take my word that this geography with basic understanding will help you to make sure that your presence is very well seen in ecology and environment and sometimes in international relations as well. What we refer them as map reading perspectives. Now, what has to be done in the context of geography? Now, the UPSC syllabus, when it talks, it says that it includes India and world geography, which is having physical parameters, social parameters, and economic parameters. And then it also says geography of India and geography of world. Very limited words are given there. Now, we have to decode that and we have to understand what are there in this particular sentences. Now, in very simple term, when we talk about geography, we have to remember two things. One is that you should be good enough in concepts. Then you should be good enough in applications. Then, if you are good enough in concepts and application, then this will help you to understand and make very systematic presence in your reading current affairs. Current affairs. And while reading the current affairs, we generally come across the places which are there in the news. And these places becomes a strong data for you to cover them in the maps, the world map and Indian map. Maps. So hence you should be good enough in the concepts, applications of the concepts, and then linking them with the current affairs so that you will have an understanding of the detailed part. Now we'll try to understand that how these concepts are there and how they are linked with the subject. Now if you take the first aspect, geomorphology. Geomorphology, the moment when you say, you should remember that it consists of two words, that is geo and morphology. Morphology means the changes, and geo, we are talking about the changes which have undergone on the earth surface, and this is mainly because of the two forces that everybody knows, and we refer them as the endogenetic forces and exogenetic forces. And these two forces are responsible for a process called as geomorphic process. So you should be good enough in understanding this geomorphic process. And this you will get from NCERT, and a normal understanding is required. What is endogenetic forces? What are the sources of endogenetic forces? And what are the sources of exogenetic forces? And these are responsible for the changes which we refer them as the geomorphology. So here we have to make a separate understanding of what are endogenetic forces. So endogenetic means the forces which originates from the interior of the earth. So some rough ideas are required. Now, while reading this in the prelims, you should understand the impact of endogenetic forces in the form of folds, in the form of faults, etc. So you have to understand what are faults, what are different types of faults, normal faults, reverse faults, thrust faults. So when they say the Himalayas are made up of the thrust faults, you should understand what context they are talking about. The recent earthquake is strike-slip fault. So what they are talking about. So hence it talks about the movement of the lithosphere plates. Now you should remember that the movement of lithosphere plate is due to the convection currents which is generated in the Earth's asthenosphere, and the impact of the movement on the lithosphere is something which is creating the folds and faults. So that is very basic data, right? So the impression of that is referred as the landforms which keep on changing, folds and faults. Now with regard to these, you have to read something called as the events which occur very fast, like earthquake, volcanic activities, etc. Now here, when you are preparing for earthquake, for prelims perspectives, you should understand what are body waves, what is P waves, what is S waves, what are love waves, what are Rayleigh waves, what is epicenter, what is focus, what are shallow earthquakes. Now sometimes we come across terms called as earthquake swarms, what we have experienced in Palghar, what we have experienced in Amreli of Gujarat, Vancouver, many areas we come across such types of events. We refer them as earthquake swarms, body waves, then again shock waves. So when we say shock waves, foreshock, aftershock waves, intensities, magnitude. So all these small terminologies of earthquakes has to be known. Then along with that, you should also know that the earthquake belts, then something about volcanic activity. So when you say volcanic activities, the magma, nature of magma, what are the impacts of the magma with more silica, less silica? Where do you find the global distribution of volcanic activities? What are different types of volcanoes are there? What is hotspot? So generally when we say hotspot, it is also a type of volcanic activity, but it is associated with mantle plume. The surface expression of mantle plume, we refer that as hotspot volcano. And these hotspot volcanoes are very important for many reasons, maybe for geothermal energy development or maybe for giving certain geological structures. So you should have certain ideas about these with reference to their current related trends. Earthquakes, volcanoes, etc. Right. So this is some rough idea where you have to be knowing. Now keeping these things in the mind, the theories are also there, like continental drift theory. Then we have sea floor spreading aspect. Then the most accepted theory called as plate tectonic theory. So basics, evidences are sufficient here. This is some rough idea about endogenetic forces. Now when you move on to exogenetic forces, so in the exogenetic forces, we have to understand something called as a phenomenon called as weathering. Weathering means the breaking up of rocks. So you should be very specific. What is physical weathering, what is chemical weathering, and what is biological weathering. So they may ask questions based on the terminologies like exfoliation, shattering, right? So these terms will be asked. Match the following process. So weathering has to be known. Then again here in the exogenetic forces, generally we refer that as a process of denudation. So in the denudation, we always come across agents of denudation. So in the UPSC syllabus, in the agents of denudation, they talk about the river and its landforms, fluvial landforms, wind and its landforms, alien landforms, groundwater and its landforms, karst landforms, glacial landforms. Right. So we have 5 agents of denudation and their landforms are very important. Sometimes they may ask them in the prelims, match the following, and even in the mains also they are very important. So landforms associated with the agents of denudation, which is very much relevant for your prelims as well. They will ask what are erosional landforms, what are depositional landforms. You should be very specific about that. What are erosional and what are depositional landforms in the exogenetic forces. And before doing this, you should have certain brief idea about something called as cosmology in geomorphological part. Cosmology, you have to read something about Big Bang. So the moment when you say Big Bang, what is singularity? Infinite hot and dense object. Then there is something associated with the Big Bang, the recent evidences. Then we come across epoch of the combination. What exactly is this? What are the first atoms? What are the first atoms formed? How the stars are there? What is Chandrasekhar limit? How the star ends its life? What are asteroids? What are trojans? Right? There is a difference between asteroids and trojans. We also have comets. So you should be knowing about these because they all are in the news. We have already sent a mission to study the trojans, the mission Lucy. And the Earth also had the two trojans. So these data are very important when you are making your preparation for prelims in the context of geomorphology. So this is first part, geomorphology, the theories, then concepts, the relevancy of that. So when you talk about weathering, you should be good enough in the examples. What are the weathering and what process are involved there? Also good enough in earthquake, the areas where the recent earthquakes have taken, the characteristics of that. Then again, the volcanic activities, the characteristics and where they have taken. Certain examples, they can be very, very relevant for your prelims and also the places in the news. Now moving down to the second aspect, we refer that as climatology. Now climatology is something which is very significantly read in the static part and also it is very relevant in the current affairs. Many aspects will be there in the climatology. Now when you are talking about climatology, generally you should understand that how the present atmosphere got evolved. So you should be knowing about the evolution of present atmosphere in very brief, like in the current affairs we have something called as last universal common ancestor, right? Then this Luca is responsible for three lives, archaea, then we have bacteria, right? So here when we talk about bacteria, the role of bacteria, the great oxidation event, then we have something called as outgassing, degassing and the present atmosphere formation, role of living organisms there. So you should understand those processes. What is the role of living organisms? What is great oxidation events and how we have reached to the present atmosphere. So you should have certain rough idea. And the moment when you know the present atmosphere, you should be good enough in knowing in detail about the composition and structure of atmosphere. Composition and structure of atmosphere. Composition means what it consists of. What are the fixed gases and their role there. For example, when you're talking about greenhouse gases, we come across carbon dioxide, we come across methane, we come across water vapor. What is their role? How they are released? What is the relevance in the present context? So you should be good enough in these. Aerosols, white aerosols, black aerosols. They have two different phenomena. When we say white aerosols, they are linked with aerosol masking. Black aerosols, they are linked with the heating of the earth's part. So you should be good enough in these parts. What are the compositions? Then the structure. The moment when you say structure, troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, then thermosphere. What exactly is seen in the troposphere? What relevant phenomena are there? The terminologies like normal lapse rate or environmental lapse rate. How this troposphere varies, where it is maximum, where it is minimum. It means that where it is extending to the high, why it is such. At equator we find it is 18 kilometers, at the poles it is less. Why it behaves like that? What is the role of Earth's rotation there? What is the role of centrifugal force? What is the role of insolation? So all these are relevant in the context of the structure, why it is like that. So all whys will be the probable questions for your prelims as well as your mains. So this is some rough idea about the structure and composition. The moment when you know this, then you have to talk about the elements of climatology. So the moment when you say elements of climatology, generally we say fundamental elements of climatology. It is nothing but the temperature, then pressure, then winds, then precipitation. So at least remember these things. Now when you are reading about temperature, you should understand what exactly is the temperature. Then there is something called as isotherms. So many times the questions are asked about isotherms. So isotherms are generally, we say, the line which connects the two equal points. And it always varies because of many reasons. Due to the shifting of the subsolar point, that is called as apparent shifting of the sun, plus uneven distribution of water and the land in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere. Some warm ocean currents like Gulf Stream, then Norwegian current, etc. So all these are responsible for variations of the isotherms. So generally you have to study them, that how the isotherms are there after summer solstice and after winter solstice. So these are the 2 months when the isotherms are compared, that is in the month of January and then again in the month of July, that is after the summer solstices. So remember, it is generally in these 2 months, January and July. Why they behave like that? Every year we find there is some question which is relevant to this isotherm part. Right. Then again, the pattern of isotherms. If they are very closed, what happens? If they are more spaced, what happens? Then in the same way, pressure. What is pressure gradient? What are pressure belts? Now, pressure belts are very much important. What are thermal pressure belts? What are dynamic pressure belts? What is the relevance? From where the wind originates? From where it ends up? So you should be having some rough idea about these pressure belts, how these pressure belts are formed. Right. Now the result of pressure gradient is the horizontal movement of the air. And this horizontal movement of air, we refer that as wind, a very simple connectivity. Now the moment when you say wind, you should understand the factors which affects the winds, like pressure gradient force, centrifugal force. Then also we come across something called as Coriolis effect. So 3 major forces you can categorize them. One is the pressure gradient force. Second one is referred as the Coriolis force or Coriolis effect. And the third one is frictional forces, the 3 forces. And because of the 3 forces, we find the wind becomes very, very complicated. And then you have to read something about the primary winds, then secondary winds, and the tertiary winds are local winds. You should be good enough in knowing primary winds, like what are onshore, what are offshore. What is the impact of onshore? What is the impact of offshore? What brings upwelling? What brings downwelling in the ocean because of these wind impacts? So you should be good enough in knowing these statements, onshore winds, offshore winds, where upwelling, where downwelling is seen here. Right. Then again, there are certain winds which are very, very specific. We refer them as geostrophic winds, like jet streams. Now, some relevance about jet streams. So something which is referred as jet stream and its relevance. So jet streams are geostrophic winds found in both the hemisphere and their characteristics. Then precipitation, nature, types, forms of precipitation, distribution of precipitation, why they receive, why convectional rainfall, what is orographic, what is frontal, what is cyclonic, where they have. So all these are very important when you're reading about precipitation. Then global distribution of precipitation. So these all are very important when you talk about the fundamental elements of climatology. And there is something called as ocean and atmospheric interference. I'm using the term ocean and atmospheric interferences, which creates the phenomena like cyclones, right, anticyclones. Then Indian Ocean Dipole, Madden-Julian Oscillation, right? So all such terminologies are very, very important. They all are very interlinked with each other. Now, the moment when you're talking about El Nino and La Nina, which is seen in Pacific Ocean, El Nino and La Nina, which is there in the Pacific Ocean, why they behave and what is their role in Indian monsoon. So generally, when you talk about Indian monsoon, I am referring to the teleconnection between Indian monsoon and the El Nino and La Nina. So there may be a statement on Indian Ocean Dipole, Madden-Julian Oscillation, and how this is linked and how it impacts the Indian monsoon. So all these are very important for your basics, concepts and current affairs in climatology. Then moving down to something called as oceanography. Now the moment when you talk about oceanography, remember Earth is called as blue planet. So hence, you have to be knowing in detail about this. So in the prelims, you have to focus on the bottom relief of oceans, which includes the continental shelf, the continental slopes, abyssal plains, right? So some rough idea about them and the relevance in the present context. Then you have to be good enough in understanding UNCLOS, United Nations Convention of Law of Sea. And when you are referring to that, you have to be good enough in the recent developments like High Sea Treaty, which countries have ratified. Signing is different, ratification is different. Signing is different, ratification is different. So which countries have ratified that UNCLOS, right? UNCLOS in the sense I'm talking about International Seabed Authority. So UNCLOS, the moment when you say, we always come across three major institutions, that is CLCS, Commission on Limiting of Continental Shelf. Then we have something called as International Seabed Authority, which talks about the polymetallic nodules or the region which is beyond 200 nautical miles. We refer that as the areas which is beyond the national jurisdiction. And that is where we come across High Sea Treaty, that is referred as biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. Now, which countries have ratified that? What are the provisions of that? What is India's role in that? So such questions you can expect in the context of the UNCLOS here, right? And also when you talk about International Seabed Authority, India has signed, or we say India has acquired deep sea mining activities in the Indian Ocean, and it has also made a proposal there. So hence, which areas where India has submitted documents for International Seabed Authorities for deep sea mining? So all those are current affairs questions which are relevant with reference to UNCLOS here. Then two important characteristics when you talk about the oceans. One is temperature, and then second is called as salinity. You should be good enough in knowing how the temperature and salinity varies in the ocean part. In the eastern part, what happens? In the western part, what happens? Why eastern parts are warmer and why western parts are comparatively colder? So here we are linking them with onshore and offshore wind patterns, upwelling and downwelling. So you should be good enough in knowing those terms. What is upwelling and what is downwelling and how they are linked with each other. The same is with reference to salinity. Now, if you know the complete idea of temperature and salinity, then this combined effect defines the density of ocean water. And this circulation is referred as thermohaline circulation. We refer this as thermohaline circulation. So you should be knowing what exactly is this thermohaline circulation. And then we have something which are referred as the movement of ocean water. So generally, we talk about the systematic rise and fall of ocean water, we refer them as tides. And then very complex movement of ocean water, we refer them as ocean currents. And then also there is something called as the waves, impact of the winds, where the energy is transferred. So some rough idea about tides and its significance. Ocean currents, and then something about the waves. So ocean currents means what are warm, what are cold ocean currents, etc. So some relevance is important here. The names of the ocean currents. Where do you find? Why they behave like that? Then after that, there is something called as corals, soft corals, hard corals. Where do you find their characteristics and the relevance in ecology and environment? And then there is something which is referred as ocean resources. Anything which is having economic benefits, biotic resources, abiotic resources, like polymetallic nodules, the hydrothermal energy which is being there. So many resources are there. Like the ocean water can be used for many activities unless we make desalination process. So what is desalination process? Right. So all these are relevant in the oceanography. So when you're reading about this oceanography and all, you should also understand what is the global distribution of water. We say that Earth has 70% of water. And then in that 70%, what is the share of the saline water and what is the share of fresh water? So 3% is the fresh water and 97% is the saline water. And in that 3%, what is the share of glaciers? What is the share of groundwater? So all these facts are very important for your prelims. Right. Then human and economic geography. So these are associated with the parameters called as regional approach. Region. So regions are geographical areas which are having homogeneous characteristics and which are not divided by the political boundaries. We refer them as regions. Right. So here we make a regional approach. And while making the regional approach, you should understand that all the areas, they are having two types of economic activities. I am defining them in a broader ways. One is agriculture and second one is industry. Agriculture and second one is industry. Now, for agriculture, what is required? The soil, precipitation, the nutrients, the weather factors, all these things are associated with agriculture, types of agriculture, patterns of agriculture, soils, issues, all these are relevant while you are reading agriculture. Like if you are reading Indian agriculture, monsoon, types of soils, salinity, acidic soils, all these are important. Then again, when you talk about industries, for industries, raw materials, minerals. So where do you find the mineral depositions? Mineral depositions of India, of the world. Where do you find them? Then different laws associated with that, acts associated with that. So these are something which are relevant in the context of economic geography. Then human geography, the moment when we say a social context is taken there. So generally in human geography, we study demography, and then the attributes of demography. Attributes of demography. Attributes means birth rates, death rates, census, which carry all those things. So these are relevant in the context of human geography. Their settlements, their social aspects. So all these are there. And this becomes easy when you are good enough in all the three parameters. Now this is some rough idea about the human and economic geography, which have to be done there. So the moment when I say attributes, it talks about all that in detail, including the terms called as demographic dividends, which countries are having the first demographic dividend, which are having the second demographic dividends. Then there is something called as Indian geography, which has a huge weightage. Now, when you are reading about Indian geography, it is a summary of whatever you have done in all the three parts. But here you should be knowing that how India has been formed based on plate tectonic theory, that is Tethysy and other aspects. Then you should be thoroughly knowing about physiographic divisions of India. Many questions will be there from this physiographic divisions of India. So 5 physiographic divisions, particular areas, particular river systems, particular activities which are there. You should be very, very thorough in these physiographic divisions. As far as possible, you try to locate the places, the rivers, etc. in the concerned physiographic divisions. For example, if you're talking about, say, northern plains, so the rivers of the northern plains, try to locate them. Then national parks which are there, try to locate them. If you're reading about Himalayas, we have certain regions which are relevant in the current affairs, try to locate them. Glacier deposits, sources of many rivers, right? So many times they ask questions on the glaciers and their sources. Sources like Satopant Glacier, we are having the glaciers in the Uttarakhand, which becomes the sources of many rivers. So sources and the glaciers will be asked, match the following. So you should be good enough in physiographic divisions, all the physiographic divisions in detail. Then neighbors of India. Neighbors of India. So here we talk about the frontier as well as coastal. Frontier as well as coastal. So you should be good enough in knowing that. And what are the issues associated with that? For example, recently we come across something called as Wakhan Corridor, right? It is in the conflict with reference to Pakistan and Afghanistan, but it is relevant for India with reference to Pak-occupied Kashmir, Galwan Valley, right? Then the two areas where the Chinese have been claiming. Then also we come across many places in LAC and LOC which are relevant. So you should be good enough in the disputed areas and other parts while you are reading the neighbors with reference to physiographic divisions. Then weather and climate of India. Weather and climate of India. And this is generally you read that in detail with reference to monsoon seasons. Southwest monsoon, northeast monsoons. Role of jet streams and other parts. So you have to be good enough in these. Then vegetation, distribution of vegetation in India and wildlife. And this is something which is relevant in your ecology and environment as well. Vegetation and wildlife activities. Then you have to be good enough in agriculture sector of India. Very, very relevant point. You have to be very detailed analytical systems of required. Tropical crops, which crops? Policies made by government, impact of that on Indian economy, certain things which are facing major problem with reference to global warming and climate change. So you should be good enough in agriculture part. Then you should be good enough in mineral deposits in India and also the industries which are there. Industries which are there and its relevance in the present context. So you should be good enough in these parts. Now when you are reading these things, you should be making a separate data on map work. For example, if you are talking about the rivers in India, you should be good enough in those rivers which are generally referred as major rivers of North Plain and major rivers of Peninsular Plains, Ganga, Yamuna, that system, Ganga River, Indus system, Brahmaputra, then Godavari, Kaveri, rivers and their tributaries. Apart from that, you should also be making notes on certain areas where the interlinking river projects have been there. For example, now we come across Rajasthan where they are making their approach. Then Maharashtra where they are talking about intrastate linking project. Right, then Ken Betwa, interlinking projects. So those projects and their relevance in the areas and which areas will be affected by those. So you should be good enough in these parts, rivers, river linkages, lakes, why they are in the news. Some lakes are associated with many types of issues like birds dying there because of botulism. Which lakes are there? Sambar Lake you will come, Chilka Lake you will come across, man-made others. Like they are the parts of Ramsar wetland sites. So you should be placing them. You can take 1 year or 2 years of current affairs and make the data, and they become very relevant in something called as the map readings. All these data becomes very important for your map readings. So you should make a separate reading for India, and in the same way you should make a map reading for world part. Now always remember, when you are making the maps, you should remember that there is something called as physical map and second one is political map. So you should be good enough in knowing these two maps in detail. Sometimes they will ask the Caspian Sea and the border countries, Black Sea, the countries which are bordering, neighboring countries of any disputed parts, Congo, Democratic Republic Congo, cities, Israel, neighboring parts, Dead Sea, neighboring parts. So you should be good enough in the places which are there at least 1 to 2 years in the current affairs. And don't get much stress there. Still much time is there. You can take up the water bodies like Black Seas are there, Caspian Seas are, Mediterranean Sea, Aral Seas you will find. Apart from that, in the South America, North America, we find many water bodies which are drying up. You will come across the lakes in the Asia which are drying up. Relevant lakes which are associated with changing in their characteristics, disputes, boundaries, etc. So all these will be a part of your geography and also with your international relations. So this is something which you should keep in the mind with reference to geographical part, right? So this is how you have to make the preparation for your geographical part, right? So by this we conclude the session. Thank you.